So I imagine you've all heard the phrase before, God helps those who help themselves. Right? I mean, we've all heard that. It floats around all kinds of people, places, and it, surprisingly enough, floats around in Christian circles, even though it is nowhere in the Bible and is kind of the opposite of what God tends to want to do. But after reading today's psalm, you can kind of see where someone might get the idea that God does help those who help themselves. There's only one problem with that. Did any of you feel uncomfortable reading the psalm this morning? I sure did. I can't say that I have lived with integrity and I have trusted in the Lord and not faltered. So, off the bat in the first verse, I'm going, I don't like this psalm very much. And then it keeps going and it talks about how we've walked faithfully and not sat with the worthless, not consorted with deceitful, and hated the company of evildoers, not sat down with the wicked, and are able to wash our hands in innocence. Didn't we just tell God in the confession that we can't do all of those things? And yet here we are sitting in the psalm saying, oh yeah, God, we've done all this. Look at us. It just didn't feel right. And I'm sitting there chanting the psalm just going, Because if God relied on us to do these things, and if he really helped the people who helped themselves, well, I don't think we'd be doing very good. Because I think it's quite evident that if the psalm is indicative of what it means to really follow God, we're not there. And we probably won't be this side of eternity. Now, it's kind of unfortunate that before Jesus showed up and before he went to the cross, that was kind of all there was. People had a list of things that they had to do. Did you sin? I've got a solution for that. How much money do you make? If you make this much, go sacrifice a bull. If you make this much, sacrifice a sheep. If you make this much, sacrifice a dove. Oh, you don't know what sin is? I've got a list for that too. 200 or so of them, or 600. It's either 200 or 600, depending on who's counting. They went through a lot of effort to make the laws add up to 613, and there's some overlap in the 613 list. You can kind of parse it down to 200. Anywho, here's a couple hundred things that you can do to make God happy with you so that you don't have to kill an animal in place of you. It's easy for us to forget that that's how following God worked, because we've been living so long under a different system. But this is the environment that Jesus showed up in. When Jesus showed up, these were the expectations that God had for his people. And there was a belief that one could meet God's expectations. In fact, the whole idea of the Pharisees was that you could meet God's expectations, and when someone did, the whole world would be redeemed. Funny how that works out. Because when someone did meet those expectations, the whole world was redeemed. It just wasn't the way they expected it to. It's part of why Peter was so confused when Jesus started saying, right after Peter gets praised for saying, "Oh, Jesus, you're the Christ, the living Son of God." Right after that is when Matthew says that Jesus starts talking about his death. Wait a minute. The Messiah's not supposed to die. He's supposed to pick the fight with the Romans. He's supposed to give us freedom and then the whole world later. Israelites were a little bit nationalistic. What can you say? That happens when you tend to have an occupying army in front of your face. So When Jesus starts talking about he's going to die, Peter said, wait, Jesus, no. Come over here. Jesus, what do you mean you're going to go to Jerusalem and suffer and die? That's not how this works. We're not going to let this happen, Jesus. And of course, you can just picture Peter doing that because this is Peter. Now, of course, Jesus, knowing what's going to happen, knowing why he showed up, says, Peter, you don't know what's going on here. You're thinking the way people think. You're not thinking the way God thinks. This is what's going to happen. This is how it's going to work. And then he says, I'm going to go to a cross. And if you want to follow me, you're going to do the same thing. And at that point, everyone goes, I don't know. I don't want to do that. But that's the way that Jesus sets forth for us. Not through, oh, I sinned, I need to kill an animal. Oh, I sinned, God, I'm sorry. And that's when Jesus on the cross says, I forgive you. Because the cross changed things. And the reason the cross changed things actually has to do with our psalm as well. Because there's only one person who can say the words of the psalm and be completely and totally truthful in doing so. There's only one person who can say that they have trusted in God and never faltered, and that can wash their hands in innocence. And it just so happens he's also God. Jesus is the only one that psalm really applies to. And in doing this, and in meeting the law perfectly, just like the Pharisees believed that someone who met the law perfectly would redeem the whole world, in meeting the law perfectly and having no sin of his own, he became that sacrifice for us. He was the one, in saying that he is innocent, took on our sin and went to that cross. And having perfectly fulfilled the law, redeemed the world. And he turned what God expected of us on its head. Because instead of God helping those who help themselves, it became God helps those who need help. God helps those who cry out to him and say, Lord, help me. Or in the words of so many people who, through the course of the Gospels, would see Jesus and cry out, Lord, have mercy on me. Because when Jesus went to the cross, it became a new covenant. Not just for the people in a little group somewhere, not just for the people who followed the law, but it's a new covenant in his blood for all people, for the forgiveness of sin. God doesn't help those who help themselves. He helps those who can't, but who turn to him, crying out for mercy. And he gives them the help that they need.